Chapter 31 The Emerald Ring. Anastasia couldn't fall asleep no matter how hard she tried. She had already gotten a warm drink from the kitchen, read some book that was lying around in the room, and was now playing around with one of her daggers. The room didn't have a window, so she had no idea what time it was. Maybe it was almost morning already. Or maybe she had only messed around for a couple of hours. Emilia was exhausted after a day of actually doing something priestess-like, so she was out like a light almost as soon as her head hit the pillow, and Rosie was the type who could just will herself to sleep to kill time. Anastasia considered going through Rosie's stuff to find a note from Sylvia, but decided not to because it would probably end with some sort of divine punishment from both Sylvia and Rosie. Every time she grew bored of something she was doing and started to get sleepy, she found her thoughts drifting towards the moment of her death, the bolt sticking out of her throat and the slow loss of consciousness. The thought of dying woke her right back up again, and forced her to seek something to distract herself with. She emptied out the pouch on her belt into her bed. 3 rings, adventurer's pearl and the token. The pearl and token weren't really interesting, but maybe she could do something with the rings. No one was awake, so the topaz one was useless right now. The emerald one, that was supposed to give the wearer clarity of mind, and the ruby one, that gave the wearer increased pain resistance, were untested so far. The necromancer picked up both rings and compared them. The emerald ring was a lot lighter, and the stone on it was cut flat and attached with a few claw-like spikes, whereas the ruby ring had a lot more metal on it, and the gemstone was cut to form a small spike. Which one to try first, she whispered while inspecting the gems. The ruby one would be a pretty simple one to test out, so it should be the first. Anastasia grabbed one of her daggers and started to fit the ring on her fingers. It was a lot bigger than the topaz ring, and her thumb was the only finger that was even close to the right size. Enchanted rings can't be resized without messing up the enchantment, so maybe she should just give it to Gilbert or Emilia to keep. They were more likely to be hit in combat anyway. Once the ring was on, she tapped the tip of her dagger with her finger, but nothing happened. After taking a closer look at the dagger, she realized that the tip was dull and bent. No one had taught her how to take care of her weapons, and she just assumed that the metal was kind of bad. Surely it had nothing to do with her shoving them between the stone doors at the machine fortress, or the countless bottles she had opened with them as a bar trick. The other one was in slightly better condition, and she was able to make a cut in her fingertip. It still hurt, but the pain was nowhere near as bad as it would be without the ring. The necromancer was happy with her newfound immunity to paper cuts and left the ring on. The emerald ring fit Anastasia's middle finger well enough. It was slightly loose, but would probably fit perfectly in a year or two. Of course, that didn't comfort her at all when she realized that there's no way to prove that she wasn't still dead. This could all be an act made by Sylvia to apologize that Anastasia died on her behalf, or maybe the whole meeting with the goddess, and what happened after it was just her brain slowly shutting down, and it was all going to end soon enough, perhaps when she fell asleep for the next time. She let out a muffled scream as she threw the emerald ring into the corner of the room. The scream was about to turn into a full-blown panic attack as she stumbled out of the room. She needed some fresh air, but the stairs proved to be a greater challenge than she expected. Somehow making it to the top and out of the inn's door, she slumped against the wall, hoping it didn't have blood in it. "Having some trouble there?" a hooded man asked as he approached Anastasia, offering his hand to help the girl back up. "Let's get you back up and find a proper place to rest." Anastasia took his hand. Perhaps because it was still dark, she didn't notice the blood-red color of the man's sleeve. "Emilia, wake up," Rosie yelled as she kicked their room's door open. "You know where Anna is? I already checked upstairs and a few streets around the inn, but found nothing. Ed hasn't seen her either." Emilia shot up from the bed and began strapping her armor as fast as she could. "Calm down, Mama Cat. It's Anna we're talking about. What's the worst that can happen? She's probably at the market. That's why we came here after all," Emilia said, trying to calm Rosie down a bit. "There are murderous evil necromancers out there that want nothing more than to drag Anna with them to that hellhole they call home. All of her stuff is here too. You think she's gone to the market in her nightwear, without boots or her fucking money?" Rosie pointed out and grabbed a dress from Anastasia's backpack. "Oh crap, you're right. Take her daggers too, you can use them," the priestess said as she tightened the last couple of straps of her chest plate. "Look, if it is a necromancer, the fight will go bad the second it starts, so focus on ending it immediately. Last time I messed up and got us almost killed in like 10 seconds. After getting Emilia's armor on, they ran to the city's gate. Some of the more able citizens had started a city watch to guard the gates, while the local lord gathered resources to revive the defunct city guard. The gates were still kept shut to avoid bandit attacks, in case they had heard that the paladins were gone. The gate guard said he hadn't let anyone out today, so Anastasia must still be in the city. Not that a wall would stop a necromancer with a city full of paladin corpses to work with, but that would draw attention. Knowing that, they returned to the inn and started their search. Rosie ran through the streets as fast as she could, while Amelia asked around whether anyone had seen Anastasia. There was this red-hooded fellow dragging around a girl who wasn't wearing much. The young folk have lost their sense of decency these days, explained a middle-aged man when Amelia questioned him. Think they were headed that way. Shit. Of course it had to be the worst case possible. The priestess cursed as she ran off to the direction the man had pointed in. Rosie was taking a breather. She had gone through all the major roads on that half of the city, but hadn't seen anything. As she was looking for a place that'd sell her something to drink, she spotted a familiar red robe. Roughly 10 meters from her, there was a man wearing the same outfit that Kukwelakit wore when they had met. Remembering Amelia's advice, she prepared one of the daggers and charged at the man from behind. Just as the blade was about to enter his back, Rosie stopped. Not because of her own will, but because her bones couldn't move. You are the one called Rosie, aren't you? The man guessed as he turned around. Chapter 32. Do not try to move. I have merely stopped your bones from moving, but not the more fleshy parts. A magnificent specimen such as you could easily injure themselves. The man explained. He was a tall, slender man with long white hair, not that much unlike Anastasia's. The robe he was wearing was indeed that of an inquisitor, though his had some patterns drawn here and there. My wife tells me you're in close relations with the so-called anchor. She also mentioned something about chicken anyhow. I'll be commandeering that blade before releasing you, he said as he pried Rosie's fingers open. Once she had given up the dagger, Rosie could feel her bones starting to move again. She immediately slammed the necromancer against a wall. Where's Anna? She growled at the man while pushing him harder against the wall. Quite fierce, aren't you? I see I have made a mistake in not mentioning that the girl is fine before releasing you. She is at a rooftop near here. I was trying to find us some breakfast before getting interrupted by you, he explained calmly. Rosie freed him and grabbed the dagger back from him. Lead the way, she commanded and pushed the necromancer. They walked past a couple of houses and turned to an alley. At the end, there was a ladder leading to the roofs. Rosie was prepared to throw the dagger for the entire way there, hoping it'd be able to reach the necromancer in time if needed. Now, having learned from the mistake earlier, I should probably explain to you that the girl is suffering from an existential conundrum caused by a strongly enchanted item, and believes that she might be dead. It's quite fascinating. She also seems somewhat sleep-deprived, the Inquisitor revealed as he started to climb up the ladders. Anastasia was lying on her back, looking at the sunrise when Rosie got to the roof. The tigress rushed over to make sure the girl was okay. Oh. Morning, Rosie. Glad you're here. If I had to listen to alizarin even for a minute more, I'd throw myself off this roof. Anastasia greeted them. Here, put this on. I can't believe you just left us like that. We've been over this, you don't go out alone. This asshole here says you're having some kind of trouble, but you seem fine to me, Rosie said as she gave the dress she had taken to Anastasia. Just give it a second, alizarin remarked. Anastasia looked at the dress for a while and tossed it aside. I don't feel like wearing a dress. This shirt and these shorts are fine. Not that it really matters since this isn't probably real. The emerald ring made me realize that it's just way too unlikely that I actually got revived by Sylvia. Oh, and Rosie, can I touch your tail? I've always wanted to, but just haven't gotten the chance. Now that this all is about to end, I might as well just ask, you know. Anastasia babbled and grabbed the tail anyway. Rosie looked at the Inquisitor, hoping to find an explanation for her friend's madness. She knew about the ring, but the rest made no sense to her. There is no change in her pulse or any other indication that she is lying. She either really believes that she might be dead or it actually is true. Ever since I found her, I have been monitoring her state, while trying my best to answer any questions she had. Apparently thinking that you are dead makes you really curious, alizarin said and sat down to make notes on something. Rosie looked at her friend more thoroughly and still didn't find anything wrong with her, no bumps in the head or the like. Clearly the girl was alive and physically well. Maybe the stress had gotten to her. Rosie tasked alizarin to go and find Amelia. Maybe she knew something they didn't, as Anastasia had specifically said that Sylvia had a hand in this. While they waited for the priestess, Anastasia continued to ask questions she normally wouldn't have dared to ask. About half of them because of their simplicity and the fear of looking stupid, and half because they were mildly dirty. It didn't take Alizarin long to find the priestess, as she had been following his trail. Upon noticing the red robe, she attacked the necromancer, just like Rosie had earlier, and was stopped in a similar manner. While I appreciate that you go this far to protect one of our more important assets, I would prefer a simpler greeting. The girl and Tigress are fine and together on that building's roof. I am one of the 2 inquisitors that doesn't want to drag Miss Anastasia back to Morn Valley. Now, please go meet them while I search for some sustenance. Alizarin explained. Having correctly guessed what the priestess would have asked, he walked away before releasing her. Knowing the city's layout, Emilia already knew how to get onto the roofs. She was relieved hearing Rosie talk from the bottom of the ladders. That's not how any of this works. I'm not a house cat, and I don't have 6. I think someone's coming up the ladders, the tigress said before being interrupted by Emilia climbing the ladders. After getting to the roof, Emilia asked for an explanation while readjusting her armor. Rosie told her about the ring and what had happened because of it. The priestess felt terribly guilty over trying to keep Anastasia's death a secret. It was downright idiotic to think that Anastasia shouldn't talk about it with someone. She did actually die. Alex shot her in the throat with a crossbow, but Lady Sylvia revived her, so it's fine now, Emilia said in a slightly hushed voice, like she was hoping Rosie wouldn't hear the whole sentence. Fine, you think it's fucking fine to get a child killed because some bitch of a goddess brought her back, and you didn't think to mention this before, because what, you thought I'd get angry? Of course I'd get angry. What the fuck is wrong with you? Rosie yelled furiously. Look, I'm so sorry, but do you have any idea how absurdly powerful she is? I guess sometimes I just forget that she's a kid. Emilia defended her decision, fully knowing that she was in the wrong and anything she said wouldn't matter. Rosie continued to scold her for a while, and promised that it would continue once Anastasia wasn't there to hear it. Alizarin came back with some croissants for everyone, and after hearing the full story from Emilia, he sat down to write the whole thing down. I came to this city after feeling hundreds of deaths in a short amount of time, expecting to find a bandit raid or something. But instead I get a god rampaging through the streets and a necromancer that thinks she is dead. You people are just full of surprises. He marveled while writing. Rosie, who had sat down as far away from Emilia as she could, while still being within arm's reach of Anastasia, still had a somewhat limited understanding of necromancy. Alizarin feeling deaths weirded her out a bit, so she asked what he meant by that. There are 2 limiting factors to necromancy. One is the amount of power you're born with, and the other your skill in harnessing it. Well, I have to admit that my powers are not much to look at compared to the other inquisitors. In terms of skill, I have no equal. The effective range of one's powers has more to do with the latter one, thus my range for something as simple as detecting materials is measured in hundreds of kilometers. He divulged while tapping his temple. For now at least. The whole reason I joined my wife's ambitious revolution was because I didn't want to see all the power Miss Anastasia has go to waste, just to uphold some silly old tradition. Instead I wished to train her and see what she could achieve. Rosie mentally categorized him as barely a good guy. Alizarin continued to observe Anastasia as she pestered her friends with seemingly endless idiotic questions. Coming up with a solution that would return the girl to her normal state proved to be a difficult task. He considered using the ring again and reasoning with the girl, but there was no telling whether the ring would just cause further damage to her mental state. He could also apply his research on controlling brains to wipe out memories, but that was far too risky, as there was no telling what kind of side effects it would have. Realizing that he had lost his focus while writing notes, he concentrated on the area surrounding the city. Ladies, I regret to inform you that we will be leaving this city immediately. About an hour off, there are 2 inquisitors traveling this way. They have been tracking me for a couple of days, but I thought that I had managed to get rid of them. Alizarin calmly explained as he started packing his notes. Chapter 33. 2 We almost got killed fighting 1, how can we even fight 2 at once? Emilia yelled. I mean we have 2 necromancers too, but Anna is not right. We cannot, we need to get to Valor first, maybe get some more people who can handle themselves, and then plan out our move. Alizarin answered. If we do not leave, we will be at a disadvantage because we cannot just kill the citizens for materials, they probably will not be as courteous. Miss Priestess and Rosie, go gather any items you might have left at your lodging and head straight to Valor. They cannot track you properly if you do not have either of us with you. Anastasia and I will pull them to the other direction and go around them, we just need to travel light. Alizarin hesitantly handed over his bag of notebooks and the light to Rosie, knowing he might lose some valuable data on Anastasia's behavior. But for now, their lives were more important. They said their goodbyes and parted. Anastasia and Alizarin ran along the rooftops, towards the city gates. Reasoning with the gate guard would have taken too long, so Alizarin just forced him to stay still, while he got the keys for the gate. The pair of necromancers ran through small paths made between the fields that surrounded the city. This was really uncomfortable for Anastasia, whose boots were in their room at the inn. "Hey Alizarin. I don't feel like running, let's just fight them here," she said and stopped running. "What? No, we have no chance here. We have no weapons or gear of any kind, there's no materials anywhere. These two were sent to hunt me down, nothing I can do will work. Carmine and Sarah's may be muscle brains, but they're good at their job." Alizarin tried to reason while nervously looking into the horizon. "So it's those two. Well, at least it will be interesting, and what's the worst that can happen? We die. You're not real to begin with, and why would I lose in a world that's made for me?" Anastasia explained with a smirk. Alizarin may have underestimated how far gone the girl was. He couldn't leave the girl behind, or all their work would be for nothing. Fearing that this might be his end, all he could do is come up with something to defend themselves with. Rosie shoved everything she found that could be Anastasia's into her backpack. Clothes, boots, an adventurer's pearl, the token that should be everything that wasn't in there already. "Look, Rosie. I'm so sorry," Amelia started to plead but was interrupted. "Not now. We'll discuss about this when everyone is safe. I think I should just run with all I have to Valor. We're not really in any danger, so it's not a problem if we get separated. You just get there as fast as you can," Rosie said, full of contempt. Well, she actually thought that it was the best way to do things, she just didn't want Amelia around for now. "Yeah, I'll check the room once more and leave after that," the priestess uttered. Rosie left in a hurry and slammed the door on her way out. The room seemed to be clear of their gear. Amelia checked under the beds, but found nothing. As she was about to leave, she noticed something glimmering in the corner of the room. A ring. "This must be the one causing all the trouble, better not leave it behind then," she said to herself and put the ring in her backpack. Amelia would have been fine with leaving Crescent as soon as everything was back in order. With the citizens once again properly worshipping Lady Sylvia, and the false church destroyed, she felt like all her goals were fulfilled, and she could finally return to her life as an adventurer. But now everything in that life seemed to be in ruins. Rosie was furious at her. Anastasia was going insane and being chased by two necromancers at once. She offered a quick prayer for Anastasia and Alizarin before leaving the inn for good. The streets were being cleaned by pretty much everyone who was able to help. It would take ages before the stains would clear out, but at least they wouldn't smell like the rotting meat that was lying here and there. As the priestess walked past, everyone greeted her. They seemed to be slightly discouraged by the obviously departing leader of their new church, but whenever she was stopped, she said she'd return for a visit every now and then. By the time she reached the gate, there were dozens of people following her, wishing to say their farewells. "Let us pray for the safety and well-being of this great city," she declared before stepping out of the gates. The fields around the city were thriving, perhaps because of Sylvia's blessings were now affecting them, or perhaps they were like that even before Amelia and her friends had arrived. She hadn't paid too much attention back then. When she came to the edge of the forest, she picked up the pace slightly and prayed that whatever lived in the forest would stay hidden and not bother her while she passed through it. Roughly a kilometer before the spot they had their break at on the way to Crescent, she spotted two men, dragging a third, unconscious one to the side of the road. Even the two more lively ones were badly injured and limping. Amelia recognized the bandits as the ones that were trying to rob them before. "Hey, guys. What's up?" she greeted them as she didn't expect them to cause any trouble again. "Please. No more. The tigress already almost killed us." One of them wept. She kneed Thomas in the groin, and he's not waking up anymore. Just leave us be. It was now far too late to escape. Anastasia and Alizarin would have to fight. Two red figures stood only 100 meters away from them, just waiting. One of them was female, not much larger than Anastasia, donning the red robe of the Inquisition that was heavily altered. The whole bottom part of the robe was removed and replaced with a baggy pair of shorts. What was left of the robe's upper part had been stuffed under a black leather vest. The other Inquisitor was considerably larger. While not quite as big as Gilbert, he would have been very intimidating from closer up. He was wearing the usual red robe, but as an added feature, it had some metal plates strapped to, probably to serve as armor. "What are they waiting for?" Anastasia asked. "They are not waiting for anything. They're trying to figure out what you can do. If it was just me standing here, they would have already attacked and killed me." Alizarin explained nervously. The smaller of the two hostile necromancers lifted her hands up, but nothing seemed to happen at first. Needles. Try stopping whatever flies at you. Alizarin yelled after realizing what the Inquisitor was doing. Suddenly the two were showered in thin, sharp bone needles. Anastasia protected herself on the last possible moment and stopped the oncoming needles, or so she thought before looking at her palm. One had hit her right in the middle of her hand. Anastasia barely had time to comprehend that she had been hit before everything started spinning. Her vision became blurred, and a ringing noise filled her ears, making it completely impossible for her to focus on the combat. Another panic attack started to set in, or maybe it was just another effect of the poison on the needles. This wasn't supposed to happen. Why would Sylvia allow this in a world created as an apology for Anastasia's death? Suddenly nothing made sense anymore. As their enemies started to close in on them, the needles flew back towards their caster, no doubt to stop Alizarin from using them as a weapon. The Inquisitors stopped about 10 meters away from their former colleague. 1.5 meters. That is the lethal range of your pathetic powers over the living. Upper class of necromancers, my ass. The female Inquisitor spoke. A pleasure as always, sirs. Alizarin responded. He knew there was no way out of this for him, but perhaps there would be a way to save Anastasia. He started to slowly walk towards the Inquisitors. Anastasia, you should be able to hear this by now, since the poison's effect should be wearing off. It saddens me that we fall for a weapon I made. Anyway, soon enough you will be able to walk, and that is what I need you to do. Walk, run, jog, whatever you can manage, just get away from here, and do not look back. Alizarin stated as he lifted his arms towards the Inquisitors. 1.5 meters is only half true. Ceres and Carmine weren't willing to take the gamble that Alizarin had somehow increased the range he could control living matter from, and reached for their weapons. Within the next few seconds, Ceres threw a dagger and hit Alizarin dead on in the heart, and in turn, Alizarin controlled the bones in his own arms, shooting them at his enemies and injuring both of them seriously. All three Inquisitors fell over as Anastasia finally got up and ran. Alizarin lied on the ground, armless and now dead. However, the other two were luckier. Alizarin's bones had ripped into their flesh, causing massive hemorrhaging, but not instantaneous death. Despite the unbearable pain, both of them got up and started to limp away. Shouldn't we chase her? Carmine spoke up for the first time. No, not in this condition. Alizarin's dead and that's all that matters, for now. Ceres responded and tried to laugh. She quickly found out that something had hit her lung. Chapter 34. Gilbert was terrible at managing the inn. Dishes from the crude meals he made had started to pile up, the tavern hadn't been cleaned, and the tables were full of stains from spilled drinks. The floor was full of empty bottles along with some other trash. Gilbert was sitting behind the counter with his face buried in his hands. How did we even manage to trash this place so quickly? Rosie's going to kill us all. He murmured in a considerable hangover. It's a proud way to go, my friend. Damar responded from the floor. They had been up late last night, trying to keep everything in order, but ended up drinking more than anyone else during the evening. The sound of Rosie kicking open the inn's door sounded like a lightning strike right next to their ears. What the fuck have you assets done to my inn? Never mind, we have no time for that now. We have necromancer trouble coming in soon. Damar, get the twig and Max. The tigress yelled while looking at the mess caused by her absence. Where's Anna and Amelia? Did something happen? Gilbert asked and perked up slightly, but his headache immediately punished him for the sudden change in pose. Anna is with a friend, but she's not in any shape to fight. Something's wrong with her head. They're trying to go around the necromancers and give us a bit of time to prepare. Amelia will be here in a bit. I just ran as fast as I could, so she was left behind. She explained. Damar had gotten up from the floor and was now trying to climb the stairs towards the quest rooms. On the way up, he cursed profusely. It took a few moments for the whole sentence to register in Gilbert's sore head, but as soon as it did, he realized the seriousness of the situation. You're saying necromancers, as in there are multiple. And what's wrong with Anna? The old adventurer said, trying his best not to seem completely incapacitated. And who is this friend you're speaking of? I assume we can trust them. Rosie did her best trying to explain the details of the situation, including the death of Anastasia and what had happened in Crescent. Gilbert still remembered how easily he had been defeated by Crimson, and couldn't imagine going against two necromancers at once, but hearing that they had a second friendly necromancer too, was something that helped him to deal with it. Zamilier and Maximilian were in considerably better shape than their party's third member. After a briefing about the situation, they agreed to help. So when can we expect for Anastasia to arrive? Maximilian asked. Sometime this evening, depends a bit on what route they take, or if they just hike it. They should be here by midnight at the very latest. Rosie estimated while looking at the map she had opened on the counter. By midnight, Emilia had arrived, but Anastasia and Alizarin were nowhere to be seen. Rosie asked Familiere to stay on watch near the gate while the others rested. Rosie stayed up too, using the messy inn as an excuse. Emilia stayed with her, but both of them stayed silent. You need to sleep too. I'm sure Alizarin has this covered, and they're only taking a detour. The priestess tried to break the ice. I'll go look for them once the sun rises. No, you won't. You'll just get your ass killed if you find her. You'll sit right the fuck there until I'm done with this shit and want to talk to you. Rosie growled. And you won't say a word. As the sun rose, Familiere came back to report that she hadn't seen anything nearby, friendly or hostile. Another day passed without a sign of them, and the atmosphere in the inn grew more and more tense. Even the guests who had no idea what was going on could feel it, as the usually noisy irregulars had become silent and serious. As the third day came to a close, Gilbert decided that it was time to go look for them, even if they didn't have a necromancer of their own. The party they decided on was Gilbert, Maximilian and Familiere, as they were slightly more competent with a bow than the others, and bows had proven somewhat effective against necromancers. Without any real idea which route Anastasia and Alizarin had taken, the searchers came up with nothing. They checked the nearby settlements and known campsites, but none had even a trace of the two necromancers. One farmer, who lived right outside Crescent, remembered seeing two seemingly injured individuals clothed in red, traveling to north. According to him, they didn't have a girl with them. On the morning of the 10th day, Rosie was heading downstairs to start the breakfast preparations and send Holly home, as she noticed a familiar red-robed guest sitting at one of the tables. She assumed Coquelicot had come with news about Anastasia and Alizarin, and she wasn't wrong. On the table in front of Coquelicot, there was a folded red cloth. Rosie recognized the patterns drawn on it as the ones on Alizarin's uniform. 4 days ago, my people found Alizarin dead. Now tell me, innkeeper, why is Anastasia not in her room? The High Inquisitor said without turning towards Rosie. Could it be that these two things are connected somehow? No. That can't be true. They were supposed to escape. Rosie screamed. Did they find any trace of Anna? Anastasia was not there, nor has she been captured. So if you don't know where she is, we have no idea. Coquelicot stated, still hiding her face. Please, tell me everything you know. Rosie asked Holly to bring them a bottle of wine. She felt like both of them might need a drink. She then proceeded to tell Coquelicot everything that happened after they met her husband. After hearing your story and combining it with what I have learned from my subordinates, I am led to believe that Anastasia is alive, somewhere out there, in a mentally unstable state. Thank you for your time, Miss Rosie. I shall take my leave now. Coquelicot said, picked up her husband's robes and started to leave. Wait. I have Alizarin's bag. Let me go get it. Rosie realized and ran upstairs. Coquelicot silently followed her. Rosie had hidden the bag behind some clothes in her wardrobe. As she was digging it out, Coquelicot stepped into the room. I see you have forgiven the priestess, she said, and pointed at Emilia, who was still sleeping. Good for her. Yeah, here's the bag. I haven't looked inside, but I think it's full of notes or something. Rosie whispered and handed the bag over. Of course it is. Having to write everything down was one of Alizarin's better qualities. The High Inquisitor remarked and left the inn without farewells. Anastasia woke up in a forest. After her initial confusion started to subside, she started to remember things. How Sarah's and Carmine had found them, how Alizarin had told her to run, how it was all her fault. She huddled up against a tree, thinking she might as well stay there until this nightmare ended. What kind of sick, twisted god would allow all this to happen in a dream they created? She yelled for Sylvia to release her and let her actually die off, but nothing happened. For a brief moment, a possibility exited in her mind, that this could all be real, but that would mean she got the real Alizarin killed. Girl of hurt knees, why cry? Said a goblin that had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. We go meet Forest King. He help when cry. Chapter 35. Anastasia decided to follow the goblin. What was there to lose anyway? She had no idea where she was. She had no water or food, so even if this Forest King was just another idiotic goblin with a fancy hat, they would probably be able to help Anastasia survive. Come. Forest King waits, the goblin shrieked and fell over, as talking while walking was just a bit too much for the critter's limited abilities. Who is this forest king? Is he a goblin? Or maybe another dead guy? Anastasia asked, fearing that her history with goblins would keep repeating itself. It's going to be like 3 goblins on top of each other in a long coat, isn't it? Forest king no goblin, no human. Forest king king of forest. Big 2. The goblin continued to shriek. I bet it's like 5 goblins then, Anastasia remarked. The deeper into the forest they walked, the weirder everything got. Mushrooms were as tall as a goblin, some taller. Trees grew at least 50 meters tall and thicker than Anastasia had ever seen before. Insects became far more common too. Beetles and caterpillars crawled everywhere in the undergrowth. As the sunlight started to reach the forest floor less and less, glowing mushrooms and moss started to grow everywhere. Anastasia started to suspect that she might be slightly drugged and looked at the wound made by between the trees. Anastasia could see deer, many different kinds of birds, a badger and a whole lot of other animals and more goblins. So is it a Spriggan then? I thought they didn't like you goblins, she asked. Spriggan. People of trees mean. Forest king kind. Give goblin many stones. The creature answered while proudly holding 5 small pebbles in front of Anastasia. Anastasia nodded out of pity. This particular one somehow grew on her. I'll call you Gobby, Gobby the goblin, she joked. The goblin stopped dead on his tracks and turned to Anastasia. Me Gobby. Goblin Gobby. It gave Anastasia one of its stones and continued walking and repeating its new name. At some point it turned into a song, by goblin standards at least. The path circled around a small pool of clear water. The bottom was easily visible, even in the dim lighting from the mushrooms and moss. Anastasia was tempted to just jump in as she wasn't feeling too fresh after all the running. Gobby, is this water safe? She asked. Water never safe, always wet, Gobby stated and peered into the pool. But sometimes frogs. The poor creature flew too close to the sun while searching for frogs and fell into the pool. Anastasia watched it flail around and screech whenever it got to the surface. At first she thought the Gobby had seen something in the pool and tried to catch it, but the longer it went on the clearer it got that something was not right. Oh shit, you can't swim, can you? Anastasia said and dropped into the pool. The water was barely deep enough to reach her belly button. She grabbed the flailing creature and lifted its head above the surface. Are you okay? She asked as the goblin coughed up water. Drowning isn't fun, trust me, I know. She put the goblin back onto the edge of the pool. Could you go behind that tree for a while? I'm going to take a bath now that I'm wet anyway, and it'd be kind of weird to have you there, Anastasia said and pointed at a nearby tree. Bath? Gobby stated. The creature's vacant stare into the abyss convinced Anastasia that it really didn't matter if the goblin was there or not, and she took her bath. During it, 4 more goblins appeared and asked Gobby whether the human was drowning or not. Anastasia had nothing to dry herself with, and was forced to put the wet clothes back on. As the sun wasn't even visible anymore and the forest air was somewhat humid, it would forever for her to dry. Gobby's 4 friends joined them on their journey to meet the Forest King. Anastasia jokingly named them Gabby, Gubby, Jibby and Gunner the Valiant. She didn't actually pay attention to which goblin was which, all she knew was that Gobby was the wet one. So are we close to this Forest King yet? She wondered. We've been walking for a while now. Forest King here. Gobby answered and looked around. Anastasia didn't see or feel anyone. So maybe it was a Spriggan after all, and Gobby just didn't know what a Spriggan is. Forest King. Brought bride to Forest King, Gobby screeched. Wait, what? That isn't what you said. I'm not, Anastasia said before getting interrupted by someone grabbing her hand from behind. Behind her stood a humanoid that was made out of metal and stone. Some of its parts had moss growing on them, as if it had been staying still for a long time. A simulacrum. This is the Forest King, Anastasia asked and pulled her hand from the simulacrum's grasp. Gobby didn't even notice her and ran to greet the simulacra. Me bring queen. The goblin screeched. Queen to finish prince. The king kneeled to match Gobby's height and handed it a small round pebble. No one knew much about the simulacra. All that had been found out was that they came out of machine fortresses, and usually guarded them fiercely. Sometimes they would wander into the wilderness for no apparent reason and end up in a cave or an abandoned house or something. Most simulacra look like humans, but there were other kinds around the world, ranging from small crab-like ones to huge centipede-like simulacra that dwelled on deserts. Due to their tendency to explode on death, no one really knew what made them work, but most scholars guessed it was a magical core of some kind. Anastasia tried backing off from the king. But they had been surrounded by 30 or so goblins, all screeching and dancing. "Look, Mr. King, I didn't know anything about this before, and would like to back out gracefully." She tried, but the king kept approaching her. The simulacrum took a firm grasp of her hand and started dragging her. They finally stopped in front of a nest-like structure that was made out of twigs and was covered with a fur of some kind. The king pointed at the nest. Is that supposed to be a bed? You know, I'm not really happy with how this is going. I mean, you're certainly one of the more attractive living statues, but that's not really my thing," she said, and tried to pull her hand free. The king pushed Anastasia into the nest and grasped her wet dress. "Oh no, this is not happening. Gobby, you goblinoid piece of shit. Come here and help me," she screamed, but the goblins were too busy being goblins and didn't hear her. Suddenly the king let go of the dress and ran off. Anastasia considered running, but the king was clearly faster than her, even if she slowed him down by throwing goblins. She needed to find another way to escape. As the king returned, he kneeled next to Anastasia and started soaking the water from her clothes to what was clearly a salvaged piece of cloth. "Oh, okay, so you have some manners. I can do this by myself, but thank you for the cloth," she uttered in surprise. "How about some food? Can you get me some of that? Like berries or something?" The king ran off again, only to return a couple of minutes later with a jar of what appeared to be honey and some blueberries on a plate, made by folding a big leaf. Anastasia was kind of amazed by the hospitality, and started eating the berries. "Where'd you get the honey anyway? It seems kind of old, not that it goes bad though." She tried to make conversation. The simulacrum could not and thus did not answer. It only kept staring Anastasia with what she assumed to be his eyes, but in truth they may have been just some random slits in the king's face plate. The king sat down cross-legged in front of the nest and waited as Anastasia ate. To keep herself distracted from thinking too much, Anastasia looked at some of the patterns carved into the metal parts of the simulacrum. While not exactly alike, they weren't that far off from the control patterns used by necromancers. Having eaten well, Anastasia started to feel tired and settled down in the nest. "I'm kind of tired from stuff, all right. Please don't do anything weird while I sleep. Oh, and could you ask the goblins to keep it down? It's nice that they're having fun, but this is like the 100th time I'm hearing this series of screeches," Anastasia muttered before falling asleep. Chapter 36. Anastasia woke up sweaty and exhausted. The events outside Crescent had been playing out in her dreams again and again, forcing her to realize that if she hadn't been such a shit, Alizarin would definitely be alive, and they would have made it to Valor safely. If this all was a dream, when would it end? Everything being real still felt like a somewhat remote idea, but maybe it was just because she didn't want to face what she had caused. The king was still sitting in front of the nest, unmoving. Anastasia tried waving her hand in front of the simulacrum's face, but got no reaction. Good morning. Do you happen to have any old clothes laying around? These are not going to dry properly within the next decade," she asked half-jokingly. "Anything but black, if possible." The king stood up and left. Some goblins ran after him for whatever reason, they probably didn't know either. Anastasia considered taking this chance to sneak out, but thinking twice, it's not like being here was terrible. The Forest King was trying his best to make her comfortable, and unlike the last time, the number of goblins seemed manageable. Maybe this was Sylvia's endgame for Anastasia. Make her live forever in the forest with a simulacrum and a few goblins. She still didn't understand why Alizarin had to die though. The king came back, carrying a folded pile of clothing. Most of it was tattered and old-looking, but at least they were clean and dry. They were well-tailored and even had some golden patterning on them. "These are elven. Where'd you get old elven clothes from? Is there a village nearby?" she asked, before realizing that there wasn't going to be an answer. "Gobby, where are you?" A goblin appeared from the undergrowth nearby. It had mud on its face, but there was a chance that it was the same Gobby Anastasia had named before. It ran towards the necromancer as fast as it could and stopped by falling over. "Queen call. Gobby serve," it screeched happily. "Yeah, I was just wondering if there was an elf village nearby," Anastasia asked, speaking as slowly as she could, so the critter would actually understand the question. "No village, but dead elves. Fought Forest King, long ago. No match for Forest King. But kill Prince," the creature explained seriously. "But King has Queen. Make Prince anew." After a story, Gobby just stared at Anastasia for a while. At first, she assumed it was just doing goblin things, but then she remembered the weird custom of giving away pebbles. She still had the one Gabi had given her after getting a name. When she presented it to the creature, it began to screech cheerily before grabbing it and running off, presumably to eat some more mud. After changing into the clothes that were apparently salvaged from dead elves, she took a walk to see the surroundings. Wherever she went, the king followed. "Look, I'm not going to run away now. You don't have to follow me," she shouted and pushed the simulacrum away. The Forest King stopped following her, but that made Anastasia feel kind of bad for it. She knew that the simulacra were just cold, unfeeling machines, but the king hadn't done anything wrong. He was probably just doing whatever he was meant to do ever since he emerged from the machine fortress where he was built. There was an abundance of wildlife around, and almost all of it had been tamed to let Anastasia pet them. Some wild boars were a bit on edge because the goblins occasionally tried to ride them, but none of them acted hostile towards her. She found some more pools of water. They were just as clear as the one she had bathed in, and the animals drank from them, so they must have been clean. Sitting at the edge of one and soaking her sore feet in it felt amazing after a couple of days of walking around without boots. She started to think living in the forest wouldn't be too bad after all. Something stepped on a branch behind her. At first, she assumed it was a goblin or the Forest King, but quickly realized that it was something living, and much larger than a goblin. She slowly got up and turned around. Between the trees stood a troll. It was slightly larger than Gilbert and clearly not happy. Baring its teeth at Anastasia, it growled and began its charge. Anastasia screamed and ran as fast as she could. The troll moved far too quickly to be killed with necromancy, and Anastasia didn't have her daggers with her in the forest. Gilbert could have stopped the beast on its tracks, but he wasn't there to save Anastasia. Emilia could have distracted it long enough for Anastasia to kill it, but Emilia wasn't there either. There was nothing Anastasia could do alone. To Anastasia's luck, the Forest King had heard her scream, and was now charging towards the troll. The two collided with a crunch as the king's shoulder crushed the beast's ribcage. As the troll backed off to cough up blood, it swung its arm at the king, shattering his already cracked stone shoulder plate. The simulacrum responded by grabbing the troll's arm and pulling it towards himself from it, while simultaneously punching it in the throat. As the troll fell over, it let out a scream that was one of the worst sounds Anastasia had ever heard. She snapped its neck out of pity before the Forest King had to just beat it to death. The simulacrum didn't seem to understand what had happened, and kept staring at Anastasia. Suddenly a horde of goblins appeared out of nowhere, armed with sticks, stones and even a small beehive. They began to rush the dead troll, and seemed to be trying to kill it again. "The queen in danger. Goblin protect," they screamed while being stung by angry bees. Anastasia decided to leave before she got stung too, and the king followed. "You must be confused. I'm a necromancer. You know what those are, right?" she said, still somehow expecting to get an answer. "I'll just show you later, okay?" The king followed her silently. Anastasia sat down on her bed and sighed. What was supposed to be a nice little walk around the area somehow turned into a fight. She looked at the simulacrum's shoulder. The hit had broken off most of the surface material, revealing a ball joint that was covered in similar light patterns as the walls had inside the machine fortress. "We need to cover that up with something. It looks important. I'm not really a crafty person, but I can probably fashion a guard from some bone or whatever," she said as she scraped off some of the moss growing on the king's arm. "I may not be able to help you with the whole making a new prince deal, because that's just not how things work, but I can fix up your shoulder as thanks for saving me back there." The necromancer ate some of the leftover honey while talking to the simulacrum about what had happened before she ended up in the forest, how she wasn't sure whether she was insane or not, and about the whole deal with the evil necromancers trying to drag her back to Morn Valley. The king simply sat there, like he was waiting for something. As she ran out of honey and needed something else to do while talking, she began scraping more moss off the Forest King. "You're a good listener, did you know that? It's a rare quality these days. By the way, is it weird that I'm doing this? It's not like horribly inappropriate or anything," Anastasia blabbered. At some point the goblins returned, victorious over their already dead foe. "Queen escaped safe. Not hurt?" one of them stopped by to ask. Anastasia nodded and the creature ran off, screeching happily. While Anastasia continued to talk to the king, more and more goblins started to gather around them. Eventually the whole tribe was present. Gabi, who had now gained some sort of higher role in the tribe's hierarchy, came to them. "We sorry to interrupt quality time, but goblin have present for queen," it said, and gave Anastasia a stick that had been dyed with blueberries and stabbed through a moldy loaf of bread. "We give queen holy bread stick." Great Goblin Treasure. Chapter 37. Anastasia looked at her new treasure. Breaking or losing it would probably anger the goblins, so now she needed to drag around a moldy piece of bread on a stick. So this is my life now. Anastasia, the forest queen, holder of the holy bread stick. She said to herself as she tested how easily the bread would come off to know whether it was going to be a problem. Luckily it wasn't, as the mold had basically welded it onto the stick. By the way, simulacrum, what exactly do they mean by making the prince anew? She said to the forest king who was sitting next to her. It can't possibly be what it sounds like. The king swiftly got up and offered his hand to Anastasia. She was glad that the king had learned not to just grab her and took his hand. They walked for a kilometer or so. It was hard to tell distances or the passage of time without the sun or any change in scenery. Next to another pool of water, there was a flat rock. On the rock lay another simulacrum. Unlike the king, this one was broken down and missing pieces. Oh, so this is the prince that the elves killed. And you guys need me to fix him up. That makes a lot more sense than what I had in mind. Anastasia confirmed. The king placed his hand on his companion's broken faceplate and looked at Anastasia. I can't promise you anything, but if this can be done with bone instead of stone and metal, we might have a chance. I've been diving hard into Alizarin's guide on the control patterns for necromancers, and I hope the idea behind your function is the same. Anastasia explained, fully realizing that she was basically talking to herself. Could you gather the goblins here? I need some help with this. The king ran off. Anastasia imagined that he was happy that there was a chance that his friend could get fixed. As the goblins gathered around the rock, Anastasia made sure to hold up the stick they had given her, hoping it'd increase their attention span. She also made some of the goblins that were standing near the pool move a bit, as she didn't feel like swimming right now. Even if there was just 30 or so goblins, the noise was unimaginable. Alright guys. We're going to start fixing the prince today, she declared, causing the goblins to screech and dance even louder. And I need your help. I've been told that there is a battlefield nearby, with tons of dead elves. Go there and gather anything metallic you find, weapons, armor, jewelry, whatever you find actually. Let's make that anything shiny you find. Anastasia had no faith in the goblins being able to tell what's metal and what's not. Shiny for queen. Forks, knives, shields, arrows of stupid elves. They sang as they left. Some went into different direction for whatever reason, but Anastasia didn't feel like asking why. She turned to the king. You will be getting me the bone I need. Go to the troll we killed earlier and take out all of its bones and scrape off whatever flesh stuck on them. She directed the simulacrum. I'll study your friend while you do that. Anastasia could have gathered the bones faster herself, but really didn't want to do it, and she really did need to inspect the broken simulacrum properly. The king took off once again. Anastasia started her project. The broken simulacrum was very similar in design as the forest king, similar patterns on the same parts, and the main differences seemed to be completely unrelated to its function. Different kind of face and shoulder plates, for example. Now that she actually paid attention to the patterns, they seemed really familiar. Perhaps controlling stone and metal like this worked on the same principle as undead thralls. The creator gives just enough power for the construction to work on its own, if the control patterns were efficient enough. Anastasia stopped for a while and sat down next to the stone. Alizarin would have enjoyed this. Everything being real would mean that she needed to figure out what to say to Kukwillikit too. Sorry my stupid ass got your man killed just didn't seem like enough. Living in the forest instead of confronting her seemed like a great idea. Necromancers traditionally did believe that there was an afterlife, it just wasn't connected to the real world in any way. But maybe, just maybe, Alizarin would be proud if Anastasia managed to pull this one off. The goblins gathered plenty of useful pieces of metal, and just as many useless things that either weren't metal at all, or were far too rusted to be of any use. They screeched happily and danced around the pile they had made. Are you guys missing a few friends? I'm pretty sure there was like 5 more, Anastasia asked while trying to count the goblins. They ran with sharps. Gabi admitted. Oh shit. They died. I don't know what to say. As the Queen of Forest, I say that you guys aren't allowed to run with anything remotely sharp, she declared. There's not that many of you left. Gabi ran to tell the other goblins the new rule. Anastasia sorted out the items they had brought from the dead elves. Knives and maybe arrows would be quite handy for carving the details into the bones. Some of the armor could be used to replace the missing cover plates and such. She put aside a few shoulder guards for the king to try on. One of the items was a huge greatsword, far too heavy and big for the necromancer to use it effectively, but she thought it was cool, so she kept it along with some weapons she could actually use. I think that should be all of them. Good job, guys. I'll find you some stones later, she told the goblins, who celebrated their success by screaming and dancing as usual. Now Anastasia just needed bone. She wasn't quite sure if the troll would have enough suitable parts, and the elf bones weren't really any good at all. When elves are alive, their bones are light and springy, so they can take some big hits without breaking bones, but after death, they harden and become one of the worst materials to use for anything. Maybe she should just ask the king to hunt down something like a moose, and get some meat to eat for a change. The forest king dragged the bones to the rock Anastasia was at. Oh. You have the bones already. That took away, Anastasia said, and turned around to face away from the king, who now had a thick coating of troll blood on him. You're going to need to wash yourself, or I will throw up every time I see you and you'll start to smell. Let's just find a pool that's a bit further away from here. She grabbed a helmet that could serve as a bucket, and they left to find a pool. The smell of blood would probably attract beasts, and the pool they'd use would be ruined. Of course they'd need to get rid of the corpse too. Trolls weren't edible for anyone with taste buds, and leather made from them wasn't too good. This should be good enough. Just jump in and move around a bit. Once you're a bit less gross, I'll pour some water on you and clean out the difficult spots. Anastasia told the simulacrum and pointed at a pool they had stopped at. The forest king did as he was asked to and dropped into the water. Hey, do you think I should just stay here? My friends are probably going crazy trying to find me, but they'll give up eventually. The necromancers I told you about would stop bothering them too if I'm not seen at Valor anymore, and they probably wouldn't find me here. Once we get your buddy fixed, we'll have more company too. Then we could just mess around with the goblins and wait out whatever timer I have on this fake world, though if this is real, it's going to be a long wait. Anastasia chatted while the king walked around in the pool. A few goblins appeared. Much like their king, they were in troll blood from head to toe. What did you do? Anastasia yelled before gagging a bit. We made 10. Troll tent. One of the goblins explained enthusiastically. Chapter 38. Anastasia looked at her new treasure. Breaking or losing it would probably anger the goblins, so now she needed to drag around a moldy piece of bread on a stick. So this is my life now. Anastasia, the forest queen, holder of the holy bread stick. She said to herself as she tested how easily the bread would come off to know whether it was going to be a problem. Luckily it wasn't, as the mold had basically welded it onto the stick. By the way, simulacrum, what exactly do they mean by making the prince anew? She said to the forest king who was sitting next to her. It can't possibly be what it sounds like. The king swiftly got up and offered his hand to Anastasia. She was glad that the king had learned not to just grab her and took his hand. They walked for a kilometer or so. It was hard to tell distances or the passage of time without the sun or any change in scenery. Next to another pool of water, there was a flat rock. On the rock lay another simulacrum. Unlike the king, this one was broken down and missing pieces. Oh, so this is the prince that the elves killed. And you guys need me to fix him up. That makes a lot more sense than what I had in mind, Anastasia confirmed. The king placed his hand on his companion's broken faceplate and looked at Anastasia. I can't promise you anything, but if this can be done with bone instead of stone and metal, we might have a chance. I've been diving hard into Alizarin's guide on the control patterns for necromancers, and I hope the idea behind your function is the same. And could you gather the goblins here? I need some help with this. The king ran off. Anastasia imagined that he was happy that there was a chance that his friend could get fixed. As the goblins gathered around the rock, Anastasia made sure to hold up the stick they had given her, hoping it'd increase their attention span. She also made some of the goblins that were standing near the pool move a bit, as she didn't feel like swimming right now. Even if there was just 30 or so goblins, the noise was unimaginable. Alright guys. We're going to start fixing the prince today, she declared, causing the goblins to screech and dance even louder. And I need your help. I've been told that there is a battlefield nearby, with tons of dead elves. Go there and gather anything metallic you find, weapons, armor, jewelry, whatever you find actually. Let's make that anything shiny you find. Anastasia had no faith in the goblins being able to tell what's metal and what's not. Shiny for queen. Forks, knives, shields, arrows of stupid elves. They sang as they left. Some went into different direction for whatever reason, but Anastasia didn't feel like asking why. She turned to the king. You will be getting me the bone I need. Go to the troll we killed earlier and take out all of its bones and scrape off whatever flesh stuck on them. She directed the simulacrum. I'll study your friend while you do that. Anastasia could have gathered the bones faster herself, but really didn't want to do it, and she really did need to inspect the broken simulacrum properly. The king took off once again. Anastasia started her project. The broken simulacrum was very similar in design as the Forest King, similar patterns on the same parts, and the main differences seemed to be completely unrelated to its function. Different kind of face and shoulder plates, for example. Now that she actually paid attention to the patterns, they seemed really familiar. Perhaps controlling stone and metal like this worked on the same principle as undead thralls. The creator gives just enough power for the construction to work on its own, if the control patterns were efficient enough. Anastasia stopped for a while and sat down next to the stone. Alizarin would have enjoyed this. Everything being real would mean that she needed to figure out what to say to Cuquillicate too. Sorry my stupid ass got your man killed just didn't seem like enough. Living in the forest instead of confronting her seemed like a great idea. Necromancers traditionally did believe that there was an afterlife, it just wasn't connected to the real world in any way. But maybe, just maybe, Alizarin would be proud if Anastasia managed to pull this one off. The goblins gathered plenty of useful pieces of metal, and just as many useless things that either weren't metal at all, or were far too rusted to be of any use. They screeched happily and danced around the pile they had made. Are you guys missing a few friends? I'm pretty sure there was like 5 more, Anastasia asked while trying to count the goblins. They ran with sharps. Gabi admitted. Oh shit. They died. I don't know what to say. As the Queen of Forest, I say that you guys aren't allowed to run with anything remotely sharp. She declared. There's not that many of you left. Gabi ran to tell the other goblins the new rule. Anastasia sorted out the items they had brought from the dead elves. Knives and maybe arrows would be quite handy for carving the details into the bones. Some of the armor could be used to replace the missing cover plates and such. She put aside a few shoulder guards for the king to try on. One of the items was a huge greatsword, far too heavy and big for the necromancer to use it effectively, but she thought it was cool, so she kept it along with some weapons she could actually use. I think that should be all of them. Good job, guys. I'll find you some stones later. She told the goblins, who celebrated their success by screaming and dancing as usual. Now Anastasia just needed bone. She wasn't quite sure if the troll would have enough suitable parts, and the elf bones weren't really any good at all. When elves are alive, their bones are light and springy, so they can take some big hits without breaking bones, but after death, they harden and become one of the worst materials to use for anything. Maybe she should just ask the king to hunt down something like a moose, and get some meat to eat for a change. The Forest King dragged the bones to the rock Anastasia was at. Oh. You have the bones already. That look way, Anastasia said, and turned around to face away from the king, who now had a thick coating of troll blood on him. You're going to need to wash yourself, or I will throw up every time I see you and you'll start to smell. Let's just find a pool that's a bit further away from here. She grabbed a helmet that could serve as a bucket, and they left to find a pool. The smell of blood would probably attract beasts, and the pool they'd use would be ruined. Of course they'd need to get rid of the corpse too. Trolls weren't edible for anyone with taste buds, and leather made from them wasn't too good. This should be good enough. Just jump in and move around a bit. Once you're a bit less gross, I'll pour some water on you and clean out the difficult spots. Anastasia told the simulacrum and pointed at a pool they had stopped at. The Forest King did as he was asked to and dropped into the water. Hey, do you think I should just stay here? My friends are probably going crazy trying to find me, but they'll give up eventually. The necromancers I told you about would stop bothering them too if I'm not seen at Valor anymore, and they probably wouldn't find me here. Once we get your buddy fixed, we'll have more company too. Then we could just mess around with the goblins and wait out whatever timer I have on this fake world, though if this is real, it's going to be a long wait. Anastasia chatted while the king walked around in the pool. A few goblins appeared. Much like their king, they were in troll blood from head to toe. What did you do? Anastasia yelled before gagging a bit. We made tent. Troll tent. One of the goblins explained enthusiastically. Chapter 39. Cuquillicate was leaning on her table. In front of her was the map of the area. She had been staring at it for hours. Anastasia, where are you? She muttered to herself. She hadn't slept or eaten properly ever since the report of Alizarin's death came, and it was showing. Her normally pale skin had turned even pastier, making the dark circles around her eyes appear even worse. The High Inquisitor's diet had changed to mostly liquid, and there were a few wine bottles around the room. One of them was shattered after being thrown at a wall. Next to the map were the folded robes of her husband. She glanced at them every now and to fuel her anger towards the other Inquisitors, and to keep herself focused. She sat down and leaned back. This single event had ruined just about every plan she had. She no longer had the insight from her husband or the ace in her sleeve, that was Anastasia. At one point she considered just attacking the royal palace on her own. With Carmine and Sarah's wounded, there wouldn't really be anyone who could pose a threat to her except Amaranth. Her old boss was no doubt staying with the cult leaders, and was powerful enough to hinder Coquelicus's control over her arms, and thus her necromancy. So it would probably just be a suicide. Madam High Inquisitor, I have the scout reports. Do you wish to read them now? Said a young man standing at the doorway to Coquelicus's room. Yeah, sure. Just leave them. I'll go through them in a minute. She responded and tried to perk up. The scouts were instructed to look for unusual activity around the area where they found Alizarin. Wherever Anastasia went, she was likely to pull off some stupid stunt and cause a commotion. Especially if she was going insane like Rosie had said. She flipped through the reports, no sign of a necromancer in any of the settlements within a walking range. The friendly elf villages around the area had their own scouts roaming the forests, and the reports from them would take a day or two to get. Coquelicus threw the papers on the floor and turned to her map. She crossed over the towns and other settlements. This would only leave a few forests and some other places of interest like riversides and ruins. It's unlikely that Anastasia would just be lying in the middle of a field with no water or shelter. Or maybe she would, she's kind of daft at times, even normally. The tortured cult loyalists had confirmed that Anastasia wasn't in the cult's possession, and that they weren't actively looking for her as Carmine and Sarah's were badly injured by Alizarin, and anyone who they could send would probably just get killed by the girl. That at least gave Coquelicus's people some more time, assuming Anastasia could find water and food or didn't get killed in some other way. Coquelicus went to take a breath of fresh air on the balcony that was connected to her room. She leaned against the railing and surveyed the area around the base. At the beginning of the revolt, she and Alizarin had taken over the Inquisition's base, while the other members were summoned to the castle. The base itself was a fully prepared fortress near the border to the south, capable of housing 400 or so personnel, but the areas around it were also loyal to her cause, and held many more able necromancers, including all of those capable of controlling living materials. All this made a direct attack against them an idiotic move, even if the loyalist necromancers currently outnumbered hers. She had also managed to turn most of the neighboring countries against the cult, as Morn Valley had been considered as an unknown or a possible threat by them. Someone trying to open up the country was more than welcome news. Aside from the recent event, things were looking good for the revolution. If Anastasia was found and would be able to get rid of the 3 remaining Inquisitors, there wouldn't even be a fight. The cult was stuck using what they considered to be the proper ways, and would be crushed by the Resistance's more modern forces, wielding weaponry developed by Alizarin and borrowed from other countries. Even if Anastasia wasn't found, they would most likely be victorious, but the cost would be too high, and their control over the area too limited. When Alizarin had told her about the girl successfully escaping, Coquelicus couldn't believe her luck. After all, Anastasia was what she feared most in the world. If the cult had managed to make her the anchor and brainwash her to respect the old ways, there was no way the revolution would have happened. Even now, the High Inquisitor could only hope that the girl would be content with her new life. If Anastasia held too much anger towards Morn Valley and was allowed to grow as a necromancer, there would always be the chance that she might come back to just wipe the whole country off the map. From what she had seen from the reports by the scouts in Valor, that was unlikely at the moment, but even the kindest soul is just one really bad day away from insanity and evil. And adventurers aren't exactly unlikely to have really bad days. Having rested for a while, Coquelicus had to return to work. Just as she was about to go back inside, she noticed someone unfamiliar running towards the fort. By the looks of it, the runner was an elf and in a hurry. Coquelicus decided to go meet them directly and jumped from her balcony. Grabbing onto some vines that grew along the wall, she slowed down her fall and hit the ground gracefully. The elf was almost at the fortress, and was surprised to be greeted by the High Inquisitor herself. Among living creatures, I thought you elves had more time than the most. Yet you run with all your might. I assume this means you carry something important with you. Coquelicus greeted the elven messenger. I'm a scout for the small village of Yom, near the Garden of the Ancients. We've had some trouble with a pack of imperfects lately, but something drew them back to the forest a few days ago. We had heard you were looking for a human child around the area, and the only thing I know that would draw them like that is the smell of humans. The exhausted elf explained. And you didn't go look because? The High Inquisitor inquired. We don't go to the forest anymore. Something in there killed almost all of our hunters. The elf answered and took a step back, fearing that the answer might anger the Inquisitor. Kakwelike was silent. That would indeed make sense. The garden was a forest within the range she could be at, and getting there wouldn't require passage through any settlements. Everything seemed to point at Anastasia being in there. Luckily, a pack of failed werewolves shouldn't be a problem for the girl, assuming she had materials. Well done, elf. We will send a team to investigate the matter and wipe out the pack while we're there as a reward. Rest here for a bit and return to your village to inform them about our arrival. Kakwelike said and returned inside. She ordered a team to be prepared immediately and returned to her room, smiling. Chapter 40. Despite knowing that she'd regret it almost immediately, Anastasia gave Gabi the permission to use the fire. She just didn't see another way out of it with even some of the goblins hopefully alive. Leaving them defenseless was too risky, and running at their pace would probably get everyone killed. King. Take me to the dead elves. She commanded the simulacrum and armed herself with a shard of troll bone and a piece of burning firewood to use as a torch. The pair ran into the woods. Having been around the bonfire for a while, Anastasia's eyes weren't used to the dim lighting anymore and couldn't see much. While focusing on her surroundings to know where the creatures were attacking from, she used the torch to find safe footing. As they closed in on the perimeter the creatures had set, she could feel 5 of them running towards the king. Now armed with something sharper than his fist, the simulacrum had no major issues dispatching the first one that got to him. Driving the sword right through it and shoving it aside, he barely lost any speed in the process. The creature looked awfully human in some ways, but the noises it made ruled out that possibility. Anastasia couldn't get a good look at it because she had to focus on not tripping, and the other 4 creatures that had now turned their attention towards her. She could also feel the rest of the pack start following them as they escaped. She tried exploding the corpse of the creature her friend had just killed, but doing it while running for her life proved to be more difficult than she had expected. Its bones shot off in all directions, but with far too little force, and nearly slowed down the other creatures. The 4 that had started their pursuit earlier were only a few meters behind Anastasia. She could use the bone shard to kill one, but that'd leave her unarmed against the other 3. Can I get a little help? She yelled, hoping that the king could figure something out. The simulacrum slowed down until Anastasia could catch up with him. Once they were side by side, the king grabbed the necromancer by the waist and flung her on his shoulder. Carrying Anastasia allowed the king to speed up to his maximum running speed, and they started to get further away from their pursuers. How strong are you exactly? Well, I guess someone that's made of stone and metal won't notice a few extra kilos. Anastasia said and grabbed onto the simulacrum's head. She peered at the creatures that were chasing them, but still couldn't quite make out what they were. The dead one she had passed looked a lot like a human, but something was off about it. They sounded a lot like wolves but clearly weren't, and werewolves are covered in fur. So perhaps they were other kind of creatures. They ran for maybe 10 more minutes before reaching the site of the battle. By then they already had a solid lead, and could prepare for the battle. The forest king stood at the edge of the area, ready to stop whatever was after them, while still leaving some distance between himself and the necromancer, in case he needed to move back a bit. The simulacrum's behavior made Anastasia think that combat might be the king's main function. She didn't know much about the simulacra, but the king certainly didn't seem like a scout or a simple manual labor model. While keeping an eye on the direction they came from, she broke some of the fragile elf bones into sharp shards and scattered them around. They should be enough to quickly finish off any enemies that got past the king. If not, she had a few bigger shards next to her, just in case. Unlike before, they didn't have a massive fire behind them, so the creatures didn't stop to surround them. Instead, the whole pack rushed towards the forest king. The first 2 met their end as the king simply cut them in half. As the 3rd beast reached him, the forest king quickly swung his sword at it. The weathered sword was past its prime, and was not designed to be used with such force, and as it hit the 3rd beast, it snapped about 30 centimeters from the cross guard, leaving the blade embedded in the beast's side. The simulacrum promptly assessed the situation and stabbed the remaining piece of his sword into the 4th beast's neck. During the fight, Anastasia kept the creatures from flanking them by shooting bone fragments to both sides of the incoming pack. Up to the point where the sword broke, everything seemed to go according to the plan. The necromancer still had no idea what they were fighting, not that it really mattered to her, as she didn't possess Gilbert's vast knowledge about the beasts of the world. Knowing the exact type wouldn't have helped her anyway. The speed at which the king could dispatch the creatures was greatly slowed by the sword breaking, and as the seventh or so rushed him, he still hadn't dealt with the one before it. The simulacrum was overrun by the beasts and fell over. No, not you two, Anastasia yelled, as their enemies bit and clutched her companion. She was nowhere near over Alizarin's death, and began throwing all material within her range at the beasts. The elven bones proved even less effective than she had though, mostly just bouncing off from the beasts' thick skins. A few of the larger pieces found their mark, badly wounding their targets. She wasn't able to kill enough of them before they charged past the downed simulacrum, towards Anastasia. Using the bones from the ones the king and she had killed and whatever scraps of control over the situation Anastasia had, she managed to impale the last few that arrived, but that still left 4 to be dealt with. With her plan in shambles and focus waning, Anastasia wasn't able to react in time to stop the charging beasts, and the first one tackled her with enough force to toss the necromancer at a tree over 5 meters away. She made an uncomfortable crunching sound as she slammed into the massive tree, but thanks to the ruby ring, stayed conscious. The beast that had hit her stood over its prey and lifted its claw to end the fight. It was interrupted by an ear-shattering screech and a rain of burning pieces of wood. Protect Queen. Burn. Slay. Kill. Gobby screamed as it jumped into the back of the creature that was threatening the Queen of Goblins. The goblins had taken knives and daggers from the pile of equipment and somehow lit themselves on fire. The confused beasts stood no chance as they were cut down by a horde of burning goblins. The carnage continued long after the threat was dealt with, and the last thing Anastasia saw before passing out was her green minions rolling in the blood of their enemies, trying to put themselves out before burning to death.